Divorce changes a person's life before and after, and how much that changes depends on how the divorce happened. In my case, it was my wife's cheating. I was a kind and good guy. I tried to do everything honestly. But my wife, who wanted new sensations, completely turned my life around. Talk about crying in your beer. He was, literally. By the time I arrived, he was on his fourth or fifth beer. Something had come up and I was running a bit late. I slid onto the stool beside him, pointed at him, and soon another beer was placed in front of him. I ordered a Boilermaker. It was miserable outside, sleeting sideways with a stiff wind, feeling like grains of sand hitting your face. I needed something to warm me up quickly. I dropped the shot glass of brandy into the mug and chugged it down. The next one went down even easier. After that, I switched back to just beer, having achieved the rosy glow I was aiming for. I figured I'd nurse this one until I left. Tony was starting to lose it, so I got us a table and ordered him some food, asking him to hold off on drinking for a while. I wanted him sober enough to fully grasp our conversation. He devoured a dozen hot wings and a large order of fries. Guess he shouldn't have skipped lunch earlier. I knew he'd never find her in an hour, and he didn't. She was right there in front of me, then she just up and disappears. I checked her mom, her girlfriends, the people she works with. Nobody knew anything. He paused and took a gulp of beer. Do you think Chris would cheat on me? We've only been married for a year. Could she really do something like that? I let him ramble for a minute before I stopped him. Tony, be honest here. Isn't that how you got her? His mouth hung open for a moment before he started ranting. You jerk. How could you say something like that? I tried to maintain a serious expression, hoping he wouldn't see my eyes through the dim lighting and alcoholic haze. I can say it, Tony, because it's true. You were both married when you got together, to each other's best friends at the time. There's a pattern here. If she'll cheat on one husband, what's stopping her from doing it again? She's had some practice now. She's probably pretty good at hiding it. He was listening intently, and you could almost see the idea taking hold in his muddled brain. I pressed on. Maybe she's been spending a lot of time with friends. Does she often go on girls' nights out? Ever wonder where she is when you're bowling and she doesn't answer the house phone? Or when her cell goes straight to voicemail and she calls you back a few minutes later out of breath? It's all easily explainable. Motive and opportunity. Tony, if she wants to cheat, she'll find a way, and there's nothing you can do about it. No, he whined, holding his head. She loves me. Says the man who was all over Gloria when I walked in. Let me guess. You just needed a shoulder to cry on. Gloria was known as a person who was easy to take advantage of. She had her own problems. She was attractive and definitely smart. But it was hard for her to say no. She flirted with me, and unlike most of those who just met her at a bar, got drunk and took her to a cheap place, I actually asked her out on a normal date. I bought her dinner, took her dancing, and at the end of the evening I took her home. We exchanged a couple of tender kisses, and I left. The next night she attacked me. Why did you leave? Because the date is over. By the way, I had a really good time. I would love to do it again sometime. I'll agree whenever you ask, she said with a grin. But you know what I mean. Do you understand what I really wanted? Why? Why what? What is it? She asked, clearly confused. Why did you want to sleep with me? Because I invited you to a restaurant and tried to entertain you. Because you thought that was what I was trying to achieve, that you felt obligated to me. The news is that I like meeting someone I'm interested in. Let's see if we work together. If I want to go beyond the first date. I'm 32 and my casual dating days are long gone. If that's all you want, then every guy in this bar and some women would love to meet you. But it's not about me, honey. Are you sure you're a man? You're not a romance novel hero brought to life by some strange curse or magic, are you? Just a guy, I laughed. Maybe a little unusual, but still just a guy. We talked a little more. Before we broke up, she asked me a question that I could hardly answer. What's wrong with me, Chill? Why am I doing all this? And please be honest. I can take it. I sighed. Han, I don't know you very well, but I'll tell you what I think based on what I do know. I believe something in your past made you insecure and damaged your self-image. That might be why you sleep with anyone who asks. You're an attractive woman, Gloria, but sitting in this bar is taking a toll on you. Not to hurt your feelings, but you've gained a bit of weight, and your skin is suffering from a lack of sunlight. I watched her face as my words sank in. Strangely, she didn't look hurt, she seemed more thoughtful. Here's Dr. Chill's advice. Spend less time in bars, join a gym or an exercise class, maybe start running. Spend more time outside. Learn to say no. And Gloria, do it for yourself, not because someone else tells you to. Learn to love yourself before trying to find love with someone else. She nodded a couple of times, stood up, kissed me on the cheek, and left. I didn't see her again for 2 weeks. Turning my attention back to Tony, I thought I should have been more empathetic with him, having been cheated on before. 4 years later, it still hurt. I bet that's what she told her first husband every time she came home after spending time with you. She might even have meant it, who knows for sure. You probably told your wife the same thing back then. Maybe you both really believed it at the time. When did it stop being a fling and start becoming a relationship? I had him reeling, and I wasn't letting up, even as painful memories resurfaced. He needed to see the kind of person he was. Her husband worked so damn much. I mean, he was my best friend, but he was so serious all the time. My wife wasn't quite as bad, but she sometimes had to work long hours. I'd call, hoping to get Charlie, but he wouldn't be there, and we'd end up talking. We started eating out together every once in a while. Charlie knew about it. We weren't trying to hide anything, and he actually thanked me. Jen, his wife, was up for that promotion, so she put in the hours and did the traveling even though she hated it. She was fine with us spending time together, saying she knew I was safe from temptation if I was with her best friend. He paused, a slight grin on his face. The first time was an accident. We got smashed. I couldn't even drive, so we had to take a cab back to her house. We opened another bottle of wine, and by the time it was finished, we were all over each other. God, did we feel awful the next morning. Swore it would never happen again, and that we would never tell. We lasted about 4 months before it happened again. Jen was in Cleveland, and Charlie was in Atlanta. We didn't even leave the house. As soon as we saw each other, I grabbed her hand and led her into the bedroom. She was great, man. As soon as the floodgates opened, we started meeting whenever they were in town, had long lunches, and spent the afternoon at their house because she wasn't working. We were careless, and one day, they both caught us. Jen was screaming, he was screaming, Chris was crying, and I was being stupid. I was about to hit Charlie when Jen hit me with her purse. It seemed to me that she was stuffed with stones, but these were her usual things. She managed to dislocate my jaw. It still hurts when the weather is cold and wet. He paused, rubbing his jaw, lost in memories. What happened then? I asked, already knowing the answer. In short, we all got divorced. I ended up losing a lot in the settlement, because this isn't a no-fault state. And Chris didn't fare much better. She got 40% while he got 60%. He insisted they sell the house unless she could buy his share, knowing how much she loved it and the time she spent making it a showcase. She couldn't afford it, so the house was sold. She also received the minimum alimony for 3 years, unless she remarried. The business was protected by a prenup. But you guys told me you got married less than a year later, I interrupted as he paused to take a drink. Didn't that cost her the alimony? It did. But it wasn't much to begin with. I had a good job and she went back to work. We had a decent living. Not the lifestyle we had before. But our bills were paid, and we had a little left over. We're planning to buy a house next year. Good for you guys. I had a house once, years ago. Ownership is a beautiful thing. It really was. I remembered it well. He sighed. Yeah, well, plans might change. I just don't know now. Cheer up, I said heartily. I'm sure it's nothing. Let me tell you about my night. I've met someone, a real catch. She's everything I want in a woman. I think she has feelings for me. But there's a drawback. She's already married. His drunken leer returned. You sly devil. I never imagined you'd go after a married woman. Be cautious, man. From my own experience, some husbands can get pretty nasty if they find out. He paused, smiling. But it's exhilarating, isn't it? Like hunting an endangered species or taking a Maserati for a joyride. You know it's wrong and illegal, but that's part of the thrill. I sighed. Yeah, well, I probably won't go through with it. Still, she's a real beauty. Have another drink with me and I'll drive you home. We can get your car tomorrow. He grumbled but agreed. He already had one DUI conviction and couldn't risk another. On the way, I looked at him. He was fast asleep, saliva dripping from the corner of his mouth. If I hadn't fed him information, made random remarks, and asked vague questions, he would have remained in the dark. His work suffered, he slept poorly, and I suspected that he found solace in frequent self-indulgence. I drove up to his house, where his wife Chris appeared, expecting to see him. What are you doing here, Chill? Where's Tony? She asked. He's sleeping. I'll bring him inside if you hold the door, I replied. Although there was anger in her eyes, she helped me put him to bed. Taking off his shoes and loosening his tie, she stepped back. That should be enough. I'll be in the guest room tonight. Thanks for bringing it back. You're a better friend than he deserves, she said. I'm exactly the kind of friend he deserves, I thought to myself when I asked her to bring coffee. I've had a few drinks, but I'm not drunk. Since we don't have work tomorrow, I'll drop by after lunch to take him to get his car. Do you mind? I suggested it. Fortunately, it wasn't too late, as he was very drunk before 10. Chris agreed, and we had a pleasant 90 minutes of conversation. She seemed a little lonely, so I turned the conversation to her, wanting to know more. Why did I do all this? Because she was the married woman I desired, and I was determined to win her over. Was I a despicable person? Absolutely. But I had my own motives. Before I transformed into an incredibly unpleasant person, I believed I was a decent man. I didn't indulge in excessive drinking, drugs, gambling, or pursue other women. Sandy, my wife, used to compare me to a Boy Scout. I diligently worked at a respectable job, cherished my wife, and even attended church. However, it turns out Sandy didn't want a Boy Scout. She desired someone less virtuous, and she found him. Then she found another. By the time I caught her, she was on to asshole number 3. What caught me off guard was her sheer audacity. It seemed that fulfilling her every desire inflated her sense of entitlement. Oh, just get over it. I still love you. I just need a little more. You've been getting extras for almost our entire marriage. It hasn't harmed you yet, has it? I ensure they're discreet and don't intrude on our time together. Throw a tantrum, act foolishly, and I'll strip you of everything you have. Unbeknownst to her, she had already taken everything I valued. The rest was just material possessions, which I could always replace. The attorney I hired echoed similar sentiments. Confessing to wrongdoing meant little without tangible evidence. Even then, my prospects were limited to a 50% chance at best. Did I resort to hiring a private investigator, bugging the house, installing GPS trackers in her car, or planting bugs in her purse? No. Instead, I purchased a small recorder from Best Buy for $39 and reached out to her, proposing another chance to reconcile. Finally, she scoffed, dictating the time and place for our meeting. And don't even think about pulling anything. I'll be watching. That plan fell through. Enlisting the help of a friend of my parents and her husband, we went to the restaurant she selected. Using a technique she had seen on TV, despite being partially deaf, she had earbuds and a device the size of a phone that amplified sound. From 3 tables away, they recorded the entire conversation. I still have the recording. Rather than seeking reconciliation, she spent 40 minutes welcoming me to a new life as a compliant cuckold, outlining a set of rules for me to abide by. I struggled to maintain a composed demeanor, informed her I would consider her propositions, and left. There were no embraces or kisses exchanged. My marriage didn't end with a bang. It didn't even elicit a whisper. However, it did earn a chuckle from my lawyer. He found it amusing when I insisted she receive everything: the house, the cars, the boat, and more. She also assumed all financial responsibilities. I only withdrew 20 grand from our savings, which she, in her hubris, failed to close, and disappeared for 3 years. I possessed a skill set highly sought after in the Middle East. No, I wasn't a mercenary. My only real fight was back in 3rd grade, and I ended up getting beaten pretty badly. After that, my dad enrolled me in Golden Gloves. I was fairly proficient at it, but I never pursued it seriously. My expertise lay in bottling lines. The company I worked for produced apple juice and sauce, and during the off-season, we subcontracted for a sports drink company. When we acquired a new labeling machine that nobody knew how to operate or fix, I took it upon myself to figure it out. The manual was subpar, and the company didn't have anyone available to assist us. Through trial and error, I conducted experiments and eventually mastered the machine. I completely revamped the manual, simplifying the instructions and adding a troubleshooting section. When production increased by 30%, it caught everyone's attention, prompting the corporate executives to visit and investigate. Impressed with my work, the sports drink company compensated me for the manual and implemented it in their other facilities. They even offered me a job, but it was in Chicago, and considering it was February, my wife swiftly vetoed the idea. Nevertheless, my efforts gained me recognition, and a headhunter reached out with job offers in various locations and companies, all of which I declined until my marriage fell apart. The next time he called, I mentioned that I would contemplate his proposal if he could locate a position as distant as possible from my current location. There was a brief silence on the line. How about Saudi Arabia? They're actively seeking someone with your specific skill set. Well, I did ask for something far away. I wasn't aware Saudi Arabia cultivated apples. It's not apples, it's water. In fact, they have an impressive system. They convert seawater into fresh water and sell both the water and the extracted sea salt. It's an efficient process with no waste. They urgently require a production manager, and the compensation is substantial. What's the catch? There must be one. He sighed. The catch is it's Saudi Arabia. You'll be 8 miles from the nearest town, and if you accept, the company won't assume responsibility. While the likelihood of harm is low, there's a risk of kidnapping for ransom, which is prevalent at the moment. However, you'll receive 1 week off every quarter, and they'll even fly you anywhere you desire. The salary is 3 times your current income, with a signing bonus of $15,000 after completing the first year and $10,000 the following year. You'll be required to sign a 2-year contract. He continued with his sales pitch. On the bright side, housing and meals are provided, so your living expenses will be minimal aside from any additional luxuries you desire. You'll work 12 days on and have 2 days off, with a 1-week vacation every quarter. Consider it. I was wavering until she did something incredibly foolish. As I left work, I spotted her and her current jerk of the moment in the parking lot. Initially, I ignored them, but then I reconsidered and approached her car, standing outside his window. "Calm down, come to my side. This nonsense has dragged on for too long," she frowned while he wore a silly grin. "I can hear you perfectly from here, you know. You need to go. I have no interest in speaking to you or your latest conquest. Does he know he's the third since we got married, or have you already professed undying love to him?" Before she could respond, he interjected. "I figured I wasn't the first, but I plan to be the last. She's with a real man now. I'll keep her in check." I relished her expression for a moment. I bet that's what her first one said. I hope you have a good job because she's high maintenance. Her favorite phrase is, "I want," And if you've ever touched snow, you'll understand how cold your bed will be until she gets what she desires. Now leave and never come back here. Actually, if you can convince the tramp to never talk to me again, I'll make it worth your while. Since we broke up, I've met some stunning women. Next time she leaves you hanging or insults your manhood, give me a call. I'll try to set you up. It's surprising, really. When she mentioned you to me, she said your package doesn't measure up to mine. You'll just be easier to manipulate, and if she wants bigger, she'll go searching. She's done it to me 3 times, and I was oblivious. Think about it. I casually rested my hand on my zipper. Do you want to take one last look at this, dear? Like in the good old days? When I leave, it will stay with me. She was furious. People nearby heard the conversation and grinned like crazy. She was so flushed that I was afraid she might have a stroke. The baby has finally reached the limit. I'm going to hurt you, he shouted, opening the door. I was standing out of his reach, and when he stretched out his leg, I grabbed the door with both hands and pushed it with all my might. He didn't expect this and collapsed. I stepped back, took out my phone and dialed 911. Soon the police arrived, followed by an ambulance. He had injuries to the lower part of his left leg. They interviewed the witnesses I asked to stay, and after the third person confirmed that he had threatened me, they just filed a report. My future ex-wife was furious when she found out that they weren't going to arrest me. "Why don't you arrest him?" she screamed at the policeman. "Why should we arrest him, ma'am?" As far as I can tell from the testimony of witnesses, he did not threaten anyone, and insulting anyone is still allowed by law. Your friend threatened him when he got out of the car, and he acted in self-defense. Would you like to go to the hospital with your friend now? He turned to me. Would you like to get an injunction against them? Based on my report, it would be pretty simple. Perhaps this will save you some trouble in the future. He had his back to her and was grinning. Thanks, officer. I hadn't thought of that. I'll come down first thing tomorrow to fill out the papers. I glanced over at Deb and grinned. She took a deep breath but decided not to speak, got behind the wheel and drove off. I had one more trick up my sleeve. Unless I'm mistaken, there's no insurance on that car, officer. You might want to check that out. Since the car was in my name, I had canceled the insurance 2 weeks ago. Surprise shit. She was standing next to her car trying to explain things 20 minutes later when I drove by. I honked the horn and waved. She looked at me and realization hit her. I could almost hear her screaming as I drove away. Saudi Arabia was an interesting experience. It wasn't enjoyable, nor was it unbearable. It was simply monotonous. Our routine consisted of working, eating, and sleeping. We had access to satellite TV, the latest movies on video, a gym, and basketball and tennis courts. We also had internet access, allowing us to chat with friends, use Facebook, and even take online classes. The workforce had very few women for obvious reasons. Those who were there were usually married to another worker. Having so many men and so few women naturally led to problems. When desire gets strong enough, a wedding ring doesn't deter much. More than half the couples either left before their contract ended or ended up getting divorced. I kept my desires in check until I visited France every quarter. Despite their reputation for rudeness and a low opinion of Americans, I found that French girls still enjoyed being with us, especially if we were spending money on them. I learned to avoid the bigger towns. The smaller ones were usually friendlier, the girls were cleaner, and the prices were lower. I loved the Riviera, especially the nude beaches. I visited a few casinos and watched people lose money. I gambled a little, just enough to avoid being kicked out. I placed a bet on a game I couldn't even pronounce or understand, and let it ride 5 times before cashing out. I was shocked to learn that I had won 80,000 euros. Not knowing what to do with it, I deposited it in the casino. On my next vacation, I received a small complimentary room with all the extras. I lost 8,000, which made the management happy. On my following trip, I won it back, plus 20,000 more. The next time I got a little drunk and foolish and lost 40,000. I never returned after that. Surprisingly, the years went by rather quickly. Thanks to my gambling winnings, I decided I wouldn't stay another year. When I announced my decision, they surprised me by offering the position of assistant manager with a 40% pay increase and a 30,000 signing bonus. After a few days of consideration, I accepted. I kept in touch with my lawyer and talked to my mom and stepbrother once a month. My ex, to put it mildly, was not pleased when I left the country. I had given power of attorney to the lawyer. It was quite straightforward, really. She received all the joint assets from the marriage, except for the $20,000 I had taken. The net worth was significantly higher than the debt, so despite her objections, the judge granted the divorce, noting that the assets would more than cover any alimony she might receive. Naturally, she couldn't afford everything without my income, and her new partner left fairly quickly, stating he wasn't willing to pay for things he would never own. She managed to sell the house at a small profit, along with my boat and everything else, and then left town. I ended up working one more year as a plant manager. I might have still been there if I hadn't received a call from my mother. She was crying. "This is Charlie. He was in a serious accident. You need to go home." Charlie was my stepbrother. Mom married his father 12 years ago, 3 years after my biological father disappeared. His father was a good man. He treated my mother well and seemed to love me. After about a year, I started introducing him as my father, which he seemed to like. Charlie was about 10 when they got married. I had never had siblings before, but I was old enough to be happy when he was around. I once gave him a party when I broke up a fight after school. He was losing, and I stepped in to help. I was a high school student, and he was in the first grade of high school. The schools were nearby, so I came over to pick up Charlie and take us home. "Leave him alone, you assholes. If you touch my brother again, you're in trouble." "I get it." I'm a pretty big guy, and the 12 and 13-year-old bullies quickly retreated. I competed in the Golden Gloves, as I mentioned before, and even won a regional championship at 15. However, I soon realized that I wasn't skilled enough to pursue it as a career. Nevertheless, the skills I gained proved useful occasionally. That afternoon, I found my old gloves and trained with him. Before long, we were sparring or training 4 days a week. A year later, it paid off when he defended himself against 2 bullies who weren't even targeting him. I had 5 weeks left on my contract and had already informed them that I wouldn't renew it. It was time to go home. Given the circumstances, they waived my final weeks, wished me well, and made me promise to consider returning in the future. When I arrived, he was in a coma, and things didn't look good. "What happened?" I asked. Mom sighed. "Things haven't been going well for him lately. He lost his wife because she cheated on him with his best friend. Then his company closed down. He started drinking. They say it contributed to the accident. We kept vigil and prayed, but 8 days later, he passed away. His ex-wife showed up briefly at the visitation. As I was heading to the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of a blonde woman hugging my mom. She was gone when I returned. She didn't attend the funeral. It turns out I was the executor of his estate. Additionally, even though his company had shut down, they continued to provide him with a full salary and benefits for 6 months. He had 2 weeks remaining when he passed away, so his insurance covered most of his medical bills. He also had a company-paid life insurance policy worth $50,000 with a double indemnity clause. Since he died in an accident, the policy paid out. He had recently changed the beneficiary to me. He also had a private policy of the same amount naming our mom as the beneficiary, so we both received $100,000 each. His savings covered the remaining medical bills. I asked my mom about his ex-wife. He had gotten married about 8 months after I left, and I never had the chance to meet her. I liked her. She was a sweet little thing, trusting and gentle. I think she really loved him. If she loved him, why did they get divorced? He left her alone too often. He was driven to succeed, and his job required a lot of travel and long hours. His best friend, the snake, she said this with more disgust than I had ever heard from her, seduced her. He was married, so he ruined 2 marriages. She begged Charlie to forgive her, but he was too hurt. She ended up marrying the snake. It won't take long for that to implode. She doesn't deserve it, but he does. So there I was. With my saved wages and the life insurance payout, I had a little over $400,000 in cash. I didn't need to find a job immediately, even though the headhunter I'd used before called me almost weekly with opportunities. I told him I wanted to take a few months off and that I'd reach out when I was ready to return to work. I spoke with my brother's friends. I talked to the snake's ex-wife. He's a jerk. I was too in love with him to see it. I'd like to say I hate her for the affair, but she was just as much a victim as I was. I can't believe she married him. By now, you've probably figured out that the woman I seduced was my brother's ex-wife, and the snake was Tony. Before deciding what to do, I did my homework. Although I had mostly moved on, my experience with my wife had left me with a low opinion of cheaters. I found Charlie's journal on his computer spanning 6 years. He wrote about meeting Chris and falling in love with her. He filled 3 pages with his joy when she agreed to marry him, and with plans for their future together. In the last year, he expressed concerns about leaving her alone, worrying that she might be drifting away from him, and about the innocence and gullibility that had partly attracted him to her. The discovery of her cheating came out in disjointed rants and episodes of deep despair. He might have forgiven her if Tony hadn't given him tapes of them together, seeking revenge for his own wife divorcing him. His last entry was 2 days before he died. Chris had called him crying, begging for a chance to talk. He was considering it, but then Tony found out and sent him more tapes. Charlie seemed to believe that Chris didn't know she was being recorded. He had been drinking the night he died, but the autopsy showed he was well below the legal limit. I think he had too much on his mind and wasn't paying attention. Entering their lives was surprisingly simple. I secured a job at his company, earning a fraction of my previous overseas income. During the interview, I casually dismissed inquiries about my change in location, expressing a desire for a more fulfilling personal life. I grew weary of the solitude. Working nonstop and only seeing women once every 13 weeks leaves little room for a meaningful existence. I longed to connect with someone, to settle down. It's hard to find the right partner when you're in the wrong place. My explanation seemed to suffice, and the following week I found myself working alongside him. As expected, he exuded the same arrogance and egotism. Within 3 weeks, I was invited to their weekly boys' night out at a nearby pub, where I generously bought drinks for him until he was incapacitated. Conversations with the other men revealed a unanimous disdain for him. Keep an eye on your woman when he's around. He's a jerk, but he's slick. When he turns on the charm, even the most virtuous woman could be swayed. It's a shame, really. His wife is the kindest person you'll ever meet, and incredibly attractive. After the 3rd time hanging out with them, I found myself escorting him home. I parked, lightly tapped on the door, and when she answered, I was taken aback. I had seen photos, but they didn't capture her true beauty. Even beneath her robe, it was evident she had a lovely figure, her almost platinum blonde hair falling loosely from a ponytail. Her strikingly blue eyes held a hint of sadness and fatigue, belying her youthful appearance. In that moment, uncertainty washed over me. Hi there. I'm not sure if Tony ever mentioned me, but I'm chill. We've been colleagues for a while. Things got a bit carried away tonight, and we felt it was safer for him not to drive. She shook my hand tentatively, then held the door as I guided him into the bedroom, where he collapsed onto the bed, asleep almost instantly. As I began to straighten him out, she insisted I leave him be. Chris escorted me to the door, expressing gratitude for looking after him, and began to close it. Wait just a moment. Let him know he can call me if he needs a ride to work in the morning. He can grab his car on the way. It was nice meeting you, Chris. Good night. After another round of thanks, she shut the door. I devised a strategy to meet them in a social setting. I must admit, Chris was quite striking with a great physique and flowing blonde hair. Her lips had a subtle cupid's bow, and her legs were truly impressive. It almost seemed like they had to be extraordinary to support her remarkable posterior. She appeared friendly. When we were introduced, Chris frowned slightly as if trying to recall something. My last name didn't match Charlie's or my mother's, and she had never encountered me before. She likely had seen old pictures of me. Back then, I was bulkier. You naturally gain muscle when one of your outlets is physical activity, with much shorter hair, and sported a goatee. In the end, I revealed the truth to good old Tony by sending him a recording of his wife cheating on him with me. I hid my identity on the video, not giving him the opportunity to identify the man who was with his wife. Tony responded with threats, vowing revenge when he found out who was involved. He also vowed to kick Chris out. I'm going to teach this woman a lesson first. After I'm done with her, she won't have much attraction left for her new partner. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard you say, Tony. Is it really worth risking jail time because of her? Just go away. I secretly hoped that he would ignore my advice. I didn't want her to suffer physically, but the thought of Tony facing any consequences didn't bother me. I called Chris. It's time for a plan B. Tony is aware, although I'm not sure how much. We must not have been as careful as we thought. He's furious and heading home. Come to my place, park the car in the garage, and close the doors. If he shows up, don't open the door. Call the police immediately. I'll be home soon and we'll decide what to do next. I have already planned my next move. The house was rented, the car was rented, and my job was nothing. We were leaving the city as soon as possible. She had already moved small things and did not want to take the furniture. I asked her to go to the bank and withdraw exactly half of our money from both checks and savings, transferring it to an account in her name only, mostly to provoke him. It worked. "She's finished!" he ranted at work. He had just been served in front of everyone. Forget about it. She didn't take more than she could have gotten anyway. If you find her and hurt her, you'll end up in jail, spending your money on bail and lawyers. She's gone, man. Tommy, another friend, is surprisingly reasonable this time. She clearly doesn't want to be with you. Let her go and find someone else. It seems easy for you. He often bragged about his skills. The idiot grinned, imagining the possibilities of the future. I suppose you're right, but it still pisses me off. And I'd like to know who this jerk is. After moving in, I sent him a nice video that showed my face all the time. When I was done with his wife, I took a moment to smile at the camera and talk about my actions in more detail. He was my brother, you despicable man. A decent man who didn't deserve the kind of abuse you subjected him to. In my opinion, a significant part of the blame for his death lies with you. It's time for you to think about your lifestyle. Ben shared a picture of your face after the collision. I wonder who told him about your courtship of Judy. Oh yes, it must be me. I sincerely hope that if you commit adultery again, the offended party will be provoked enough to take revenge. If I find out who it is, I will definitely have a meaningful conversation with him. My sincere offer to you is to move and start a new life. You are being closely watched now, and rumors are spreading. Later, I learned he attempted another woman and ended up with 2 broken ribs and severely bruised testicles as consequences. I had no involvement. He discovered the outcome on his own. If it hadn't occurred in a bar, Tony might have faced a fatal outcome. The individual had to cover his medical expenses, fulfill 6 months of community service, and undergo anger management counseling. During the trial, a significant aspect was my detailed account of his past actions provided to the defense attorney. Following the verdict, the judge advised Tony to find a new hobby, cautioning that his current one of pursuing married women could lead to his demise. I actually attended the trial, prepared to testify. However, after hearing my narrative, the lawyer declined my testimony, but still wanted me present to throw off balance. I could sense from his demeanor that he was itching for confrontation. Yet, he wisely followed his lawyer's advice for once. We returned to my hometown. The first meeting with my mother shocked her. Despite the pleasant communication, when we returned home, I explained my actions to her, which led to her tearful realization that she was being manipulated again. "What's next? Are you going to kick me out? You got your satisfaction and got your revenge, so now I'm done?" I silently endured her outburst, admitting my guilt, until she exhausted her reproaches. "You're right. I behaved terribly. But if you're honest, you'll admit that you asked for it, at least to some extent. I originally planned to kick you out as soon as I was done, but suddenly I have feelings for you. That's the thing. Stay with me until we sort out our emotions. If you want to leave, or I decide it's time for you to leave, I'll give you enough money so you can find a place to live comfortably for 6 months. After that, you'll be on your own. Is it a deal?" She agreed, and we lived together for 8 months. Chris believed that constant intimacy was the key to my heart, and for the first 6 months, she almost overwhelmed me with it. And she was exceptional. While some excel in painting, writing, mechanics, or mathematics, her talent lay in intimacy. She had a rich imagination, a sense of humor, and there wasn't a script she didn't use. In a non-intimate context, I found her funny and charming. When we first started dating, I asked her about her aspirations, and a month later she unveiled some pottery to me. These pieces were crafted with care, displaying a range of emotions from humor to sadness. Some were purely decorative, while others were functional. What surprised me the most was that she was the artist behind them. It turned out she had apprenticed under her uncle, a renowned potter in the area, with pieces displayed in prestigious galleries like the National Gallery and the Smithsonian. Eager to reignite her passion, I provided her with a small building and all the necessary tools to establish her own studio. The excitement was palpable when I revealed my gesture, resulting in an intense, physical connection that left me momentarily dazed. For the next 3 months, she dedicated herself to her craft, working tirelessly 6 days a week. Eventually, she advertised a Saturday sale in the local paper, drawing a sizable crowd, many of whom remembered her uncle. Each visitor received a numbered ticket, allowing them to select 3 pieces during the initial round. The enthusiastic response indicated a promising future for her business, with prices surpassing my expectations. It became evident that her talents extended far beyond the realm of intimacy. 2 months later, as I sat at the kitchen table, she entered the room. Sandy had been dropping hints about a more permanent arrangement until about 6 weeks ago, when she abruptly stopped. Alarm bells started ringing in my head. I decided to have a professional look into it. Turns out it was a fellow potter, someone she had been close to when she first started out in the trade. They had met at her shop at least 3 times, and I hadn't even known that the couch in her office could fold out into a bed. The moment she walked in, she could tell that I knew. To her credit, she didn't try to argue or plead her case. She simply sighed and asked for until the weekend to gather her belongings. I granted her request for time, and even provided her with some money to help her until her business stabilized. It was something Charlie would have wanted. The sad reality was that I had anticipated this. I had looked into her past and discovered that she had cheated on a boyfriend and a fiancé before. With Charlie, it seemed to be par for the course. If she hadn't ended up with me, she would have cheated on Tony, or someone else eventually. Over the next 20 years, she went on to marry and divorce 4 more times, each ending due to her infidelity. Remarkably, she even warned the last 2 spouses who still chose to marry her. I wasted no time. I contacted the headhunter, and within 6 weeks I was back in Saudi Arabia. I completed 2 more contracts, which boosted my savings significantly. Thanks to a savvy investment advisor, my nest egg was nearing $750,000. This was shortly after the economy took a hit, and I was considering purchasing a nice home or some investment properties. The agent presented several appealing options, but each had its drawbacks. Finally, they introduced me to a set of apartments, 12 duplexes in need of serious renovation. While they were structurally sound, years of neglect had taken their toll. I purchased them at a deeply discounted rate, allowing me ample funds for renovations. While I hired contractors for certain tasks, I personally handled many repairs, such as roofing, painting, and flooring. Plumbing and electrical work were beyond my expertise, so I entrusted those to professionals. Within 3 months, 8 units were occupied, and after a year, all were fully renovated with an average occupancy rate of 90%. As the economy improved, I sold them for quadruple what I invested. I already had my eye on another set of properties, potentially inherited, with the current owner uncertain about their plans. I hoped offering cash would persuade them, despite the properties being located 100 miles away, as I was accustomed to relocating. In a strategic move, I negotiated 6 months of rent-free occupancy with the new owners of my previous apartments. With 2 months remaining, there was a surprise visitor at my door, Sandy, my ex, whom I hadn't seen in nearly 4 years. She appeared taken aback. Immediately, she demanded, "What brings you here?" Still harboring a cold reception from our past interactions, she inquired about my presence. "I reside here. What do you need?" I replied. With a hesitant tone, she explained, "Well, I just moved in 4 doors down. I had no clue you lived here. With no one else at home, I managed to lock myself out. My keys and phone are in my purse, so I went door to door until someone answered. Could I use your phone to call the management company?" Despite my reservations, I allowed her entry, dialing the number for her as I knew it by heart. While she spoke with the management detailing her predicament, they assured assistance would arrive promptly. Since it had begun to rain, I offered her shelter, occupying myself with packing. As she glanced at the photographs adorning my walls and tables, images of Charlie, Mom, my stepdad, Dad, friends from Saudi Arabia, and old high school and college buddies, including 1 or 2 of Chris, memories flooded back. During a period when she was between spouses, we rekindled our connection for a few months upon my return. However, when I clarified I had no intention of marrying her, she gradually drifted away. Her business flourished, and she wisely ensured its separation from every marriage. "None of me?" Sandy's voice held a tinge of hurt, leaving me puzzled. "Not a single one," I responded. "I discarded them when I left for Saudi Arabia the first time. Those weren't memories I wished to hold on to." A small tear glistened, catching me off guard. "Why did it matter so much?" "I've never said this before, Mitchell, but I'm sorry. I treated you terribly. I'd like to believe I've grown since then. Reflecting on it now, I can't fathom why I was so arrogant, so selfish. I understand if you don't want to hear this, but I made a promise to myself that if I ever had the chance, I'd apologize. I know we'll never reconcile, but life has taught me that karma can be unforgiving, and I don't want you to harbor eternal hatred towards me." I had long ceased to harbor any hatred towards her. It simply wasn't worth it. To be honest, I no longer held any feelings for her at all. I conveyed this to her, which seemed to bring her some comfort. Just then, the representative from the management firm arrived. Although I hadn't actively sought news of her upon my return home, snippets of her life occasionally reached me through mutual friends. She had remarried, but it ended after 4 years. She never regained the lifestyle we once shared. That seemed punishment enough. Yet her embrace still caught me by surprise. I only encountered her once more before her untimely death in a car accident at the age of 42. I read her obituary but chose not to attend the funeral. Instead, I sent a small bouquet anonymously in remembrance of our better days. I journeyed to the city, checked into a hotel, and awaited the real estate agent's call. The following day, she rang, informing me that the property owner wished to arrange a meeting. As I gazed out the window of the agency, she pulled up in a sleek Audi. Her fiery red hair flowed freely in the breeze, and her business attire exuded an unexpected allure. Shielded behind oversized sunglasses, her face remained elusive yet strangely familiar. Upon entering, she paused, locking eyes with me. Removing her shades confirmed my suspicion. It was Gloria. The last time we crossed paths was nearly 6 years ago at a bar. Grins spread across our faces as we embraced, spending the ensuing hour catching up, politely asking the agent for some time alone. "What happened to you? After our conversation, you vanished. I was hoping for another date." Her gleaming white teeth sparkled as she spoke. "I followed the advice of the first man I'd been with in 2 years who didn't want to sleep with me. I relocated here, got a promotion, sought therapy, made supportive friends, exercised, and generally sorted myself out. I abstained from intimacy for over 2 years, and when I finally did, it was after marriage. I assured him I was worth the wait, and he agreed. We enjoyed 3 wonderful years together." He had been a dentist and a reservist. He was deployed but remained safe until he was killed while volunteering for the Afghan government, providing dental care to children. The clinic was struck by 5 RPGs, destroying the building. They found him beneath the rubble, shielding 2 children who survived. For a moment, sadness clouded her expression. Then she smiled. "I heard about what happened with Tony. It troubled me for a while, trying to reconcile the man I knew with such cruelty. But I eventually came to terms with it. I can't say I'd have reacted the same way, but I've never been in that situation. Now, promise me you'll let me cook dinner for you tonight, and we'll contact the agent." I did, and we did. She wasn't certain about selling, and I wasn't fully committed to investing such a large sum. We decided to postpone the decision, and I returned to the hotel to prepare for my date. Her house was situated in a lovely neighborhood, and after acquiring knowledge about real estate, I estimated its value to be between $400,000 to $600,000, depending on acreage and interior quality. Gloria greeted me at the door, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, amused by my formal attire. I should have mentioned we're keeping it casual. Ditch the tie and jacket. I'd offer you a drink, but I've been sober since the night I left that bar. How about a glass of tea instead? Having largely abstained from alcohol due to my time abroad, I didn't mind at all. She insisted I assist her with dinner. After putting the casserole in the oven, she gave me a tour of the property. 11 acres with a horse barn, mirroring her neighbors. An Olympic-sized pool, hot tub, pool, guest house, and a complete gym. I adjusted my estimate upwards by a third. She chuckled. "I'm aware it's a lot of information for one person, but the truth is, I adored this house." "Jimmy bought it for me as a wedding gift," she said, her eyes welling up as I embraced her. Her affection for him was evident. During dinner, she mentioned rarely using the home gym, preferring the Y instead. She believed it helped her stay grounded. I caught her up on everything I'd been doing since we last saw each other. "Why haven't you remarried?" she asked. I shrugged. Never met anyone I wanted that much. There was this attractive redhead I had my eye on, but she vanished years ago. I suppose I've been holding a torch for her ever since. She chuckled, understanding the jest. Then her tone turned serious. "I often wondered what it would have been like to be with you, and now here we are, both single. I wouldn't mind being courted by someone I've always had a soft spot for. Just know, the chances of getting me into bed are slim to none, unless we're ready to commit to each other seriously." Here it was, the culmination of our night. Laughter, ease in each other's company. I assisted her in cleaning the dishes, and in return, she convinced me to watch a chick flick on her oversized TV, holding my hand as we sat together. That was sufficient. We became partners in the apartment business. In exchange for a 50% stake, I renovated the apartments and devoted all my free time to her. While we had passionate makeout sessions, she maintained her boundaries, and that was as far as it went. This routine had persisted for the past 6 months. Lately, she had been dropping hints about a deeper commitment, mentioning time constraints. I had never encountered a woman so enamored with the idea of having children. Now I find myself in this quaint coffee shop, absent-mindedly twirling the diamond ring in my hand. Tonight I intended to propose a formal union, an equal partnership in all aspects except what she already had with her late husband, a respect I deemed necessary. I envisioned a future where we would expand our family. I was confident she would agree. I won't ask for luck, as I'm certain I won't need it.